Every year, the postdoctoral students at Northwestern University from every department gather together at a conference. The purpose of the conference is to give them career advice, resume help, and networking contacts that would make finding a job easier once their fellowships conclude. Last year, I was invited to be their keynote speaker. When I asked the woman organizing the conference, a medical postdoc herself, what she thought I should focus on in my remarks, she said, "I'd like you to give these sad and despairing people some hope for the future." I was astonished. How could these people, the cream of the academic crop, be sad, despairing, or hopeless? They have everything. They've achieved everything. What about their lives could possibly be so bleak, I asked her. So she proceeded to explain something of a postdoc's life to me. Whether these men and women have been studying engineering, medicine, science, philosophy, history, or music, each one of them has spent the last 15 years since high school as a high achiever, performing extraordinarily well in school. They've competed for and won top positions in their undergraduate and graduate programs, earned PhDs, and have been awarded exclusive postdoctoral fellowships. All of this work has been aimed at a brass ring, the permanent faculty position at a prestigious university. But now, having spent their entire academic careers as winners, many of them have found themselves losers because these plum jobs are few and far between. They will now embark on a new life as a failed star in their eyes and in the eyes of their peers, settling for a job in the corporate world or perhaps teaching in a low-prestige university or college. I would be addressing them while they were still absorbing this blow to their own self-worth and their value in the eyes of their peers. Thinking through what I would say to them, I found I could empathize with them a little. In my corner of the world, I'm what some people would call a failure too. I teach at a university but don't have a tenured position. I run my own consulting company of just 3 people. I've published but only one small book. I've never won an award. I don't have a website or Twitter followers, and very few people know my name. If you were classifying the brightness of academic stars, you'd have to put me in one of the dimmer categories. But drawing my inspiration from the single most frequent phrase in the Bible, "Be not afraid, lift up your hearts," I gave the postdocs a talk which is the basis of the one I'm offering you now. As it was with them, my goal is to encourage us to separate a healthy pursuit of excellence, which is possible for us in any job, from the world's acclaim or disregard of what we do. If we can learn to do this simple yet very challenging thing, we take an important step to living as Christ asks us to, in the world without being of the world. Living here in the here and now, but beyond it all at the same time, we begin to experience the peace of mind and the joy that comes from the certain hope that our work always makes a difference to others, somehow, somewhere. For Christian men and women, adopting this frame of mind is critical if we want to escape the fate of the seed sown among the thorns. That is, the man who hears the message, but then worldly anxiety and the lure of money choke it off. Such a one produces no yield. No yield. Barrenness is the last thing any of us wants. And so starting where we are tonight, tender plants who have heard the word growing in the thorny world, let us begin again, allowing ourselves slowly but surely to be transplanted to the good soil where thorns cannot touch us and where our yield will increase 30, 60, or 100-fold. To begin again, to reboot, so to speak, Christ urges his adult followers to become like little children, innocent and humble. So that's where I'd like to begin, back in our childlike idea of work. When you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up? A fireman? A ballerina? A teacher? Or a CTA driver? As children, we didn't worry about being the most highly decorated fireman, the prima ballerina, the award-winning teacher, or the CTA Employee of the Year. We just wanted to do the work that called to us. Work and joy were one and the same. But as we grow up, our ambition finds a new focus. My focus changed, and probably yours did too, as soon as I started school. As my day began to fill with study and tests, grades, class ranks, and prizes, I became keenly aware of how I compared to other kids, for better or for worse. I noticed, too, that adults stopped asking me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" and started asking instead, "How's school? How are your grades? What's your best subject?" It was obvious what the adults in my life valued, and I wanted to please them, wanting what they wanted, for me to be good at school. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that. After all, no one matures into a doctor or musician or athlete just by waiting around to be anointed. We have to master foundational subjects and skills, and so we study and practice, succeeding and failing, always learning through a feedback loop of evaluation and comparison. Frankly, I was lucky. It wasn't so bad for me. I was pretty good at school. But gradually, as my grades and advanced placement tests won me more and more praise, I found being good at school a pleasurable end in and of itself, and so my ambition ratcheted up a notch. Now I wanted to be great at school. I was sure the top of the class was the only place to be. Today, as I listen to my friends, I find that things haven't changed much in 40 years. Guess what? One friend enthusiastically tells me, "My daughter is the class valedictorian." "My niece got a perfect ACT, says another. "My son won an international violin competition. My granddaughter was just accepted at Harvard." Somehow, the particular piece of music he played at the competition, or the point she made in her valedictory speech, or the subject she wants to study are all tangential to the thing we all still really value, competitive achievement. Now, in the fully adult world, with SATs, ACTs, GPAs, and class ranks long behind us, craving for competitive achievement still motivates us. We just play the game on a different field. So we set our sights on being the youngest tenured professor in our department, a millionaire before we're 30, a media superstar, a best-selling author, a Twitter sensation, a TED celebrity, stardom. More than what we accomplish, more than the difference we make, more than our own satisfaction in our work, winning the greatness game is what we aim for. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about along the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. So it wasn't just the Pharisees who were constantly occupied with status and precedence, but everybody, even the people Christ called personally to follow him. 2,000 years later, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So what if we lose the game, like my postdocs? What if we don't get that big promotion I've been fighting for, or you don't make that astonishing discovery you've been working nights and weekends for, or receive that special honor you've been aching for? What if you toil away for years in a laboratory but never direct it? What if I spend my days teaching and researching, but in the end never get tenure? What if, instead of becoming acclaimed somebodies, we end up unsung nobodies? Once I was the son of a famous father. Now I am the father of a famous son. So goes the bitter-sounding remark of a man who was nobody, Abraham Mendelssohn, the son of the leading philosopher of the mid-18th century, Moses Mendelssohn, and the father of the musical prodigy and prolific composer, Felix Mendelssohn. How depressing it must have been to be Abraham, the man who achieved nothing praiseworthy himself, the man many biographies of Felix skip over entirely, describing the composer as the grandson of the prominent philosopher Moses Mendelssohn. Who would blame him if, scraped so hard by the thorns of disregard, Abraham bled to death from despair? But this wise and faithful man was nowhere near the thorns, because he was planted in good soil. Once I was the son of a famous father. Now I am the father of a famous son. It seems that God has chosen me to be the link between the two. He found his self-worth not in the acclaim of others, but in the certainty that his life had a purpose and was a part of something bigger than himself. Thinking about Abraham has given me a completely new take on the first chapter of Matthew, and I'll never find those begats boring again. Instead, I find them inspiring, particularly when I think about the men in that genealogy about whom we know absolutely nothing but their names and their place in a chain of procreation. Now, we know at least something about Jesus' early ancestors, about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We know about Ruth and Boaz and Jesse. We know about David and Solomon, Uzziah and Ahaz. They are all famous somebodies. But beginning with Abiud after the Babylonian exile, we know nothing of Eliakim, Azor, Zakok, Achim, Eliud, Eleazar, Mathan, or Jacob, the father of Joseph. No stories, no deeds, no honors, just names. But no one would call these essential contributors to the history of salvation nobody. So whenever career disappointment begins to unsettle me, whenever the thorns of disregard begin to catch at my skin, I try to remember Abraham Mendelssohn and those begats and reorient myself in the hope that if I do my work each day with quality and integrity, it will bear fruit, whether or not anyone else recognizes it, whether it happens in my lifetime at all. I'd be glad to join the company of those other nobodies unsung in their lifetimes, Vincent van Gogh, Emily Dickinson, and Saint Therese of Lisieux. You never know what fruit you will bear. So, lift up your heart. Maybe that's something you say in an undergraduate creative writing class, that your teaching will launch a love of poetry in the person who will become our next poet laureate. Maybe that experiment of yours that resulted in nothing more than a footnote in a minor journal will spark an idea that ultimately cracks a thorny medical problem. Maybe your integrity and collegiality becomes the model for leadership for someone who starts her own company. And maybe in 2 centuries, one of your great-great-great-grandchildren will do something extraordinary because of a lesson your family passed down as a result of something you thought about during this very hour. Every one of those achievements belongs as much to you as it does to the one who brings them to final fruit. By doing something good for someone else, you've served the good of all. You're somebody, the way Jesus defines a somebody. Whoever wants to be first must be last and the servant of all. The one who is the servant of all has a great reward in heaven, we're promised, but I think we have a great reward here on earth too. The freedom to go to work each day, free of thorns, unperturbed and unperturbable, stretching our roots deep into good soil, trusting in God, knowing the fruit will come. And with disregard under control, let's have a look at what happens if our fortunes go in the other direction and we become the toast of the town. Let's say your hard work gets you all the acclaim you could ever want. You're promoted and become the youngest partner in your consulting firm. Or you're feted as the top-ranked salesperson in the president's circle. Or you're presented with a trophy for your creative work in the advertising industry. All seems bright and beautiful, but the thorns are waiting. If disregard makes us fear we're nobody, then fulsome acclaim seduces us into thinking we're really somebody. In fact, the only body exclusively entitled to the credit for our achievements. We made partner after 5 years of grueling 80-hour work weeks. We won that sales award after logging 100,000 airline miles chasing customers. We deserve that trophy because, well, we're just more talented than anyone else. Which thorn do you think is worse? The one that makes us bleed in despair, or the one that makes us bleed in arrogance? Frankly, I'd be hard-pressed to choose between the two. Great achievements are like trees, Cicero said, in the height of which we take more pleasure than in their roots and trunks. He's right. We take great pleasure in the superior height of our tree at the moment of a glorious achievement. But take away our trunk and roots, and what are we then? a bunch of dead leaves piled up on the ground. That's why everyone needs a mom like Margherita Sarto, whose son, Giuseppe Melchiorre Sarto, became Pope Pius X and ultimately Saint Pius X, one of the megastars of the Roman Catholic Church. Margherita didn't live to see her son elected Pope back in 1903, but when he was made a bishop, he went to visit her. She took his hand and kissed his bishop's ring, and then she said to him, "Your ring is very nice, Giuseppe, but you wouldn't have that one if I didn't have this one," holding up her hand with its wedding ring on it. She's right. She was his trunk, and she didn't want him to forget he was a whole tree, not just a canopy of high-altitude leaves. None of us should ever forget the same lesson either, because the more we acknowledge our trunks and roots, the less the chance our height will distract us while the thorns of acclaim begin to dig into our skin, making us bleed with arrogance. Just how dense my own root system is occurred to me last year during a rare brush with stardom. Not that long ago, I had a chance to give a speech at a conference in Las Vegas for the McDonald's Corporation. I've given many speeches in my life, but not quite one like this, because in my audience there were going to be 6,300 people. I'd never talked to a group that big, and I was more than a little daunted by the prospect. I worked very hard on my speech, and in the end, it went off beautifully. When I finished, all the room stood and applauded, and afterwards many people came to compliment me. As you can imagine, I felt like quite a bright little star. But on the way home, on the plane, savoring my triumph, my mind gradually began to wander over all of the things that conspired to make me a success that day. First, I thought about my client at McDonald's who made the whole opportunity possible. She'd heard me speak at another meeting and thought I could make a difference to the people at that conference, and so she fought to get me on the agenda. I wouldn't have been there, not at all, had it not been for her. And then what about the people who designed that stage, who managed the light and sound system so they could see and hear me, and the makeup artist who made sure I looked presentable on an 18-foot screen? And how did I even know what to talk about? Everything I had to say, in fact, everything I say in a speech or a classroom, everything I'm saying right now, is the result of things I've learned from other people. Whether that teaching happened in a classroom or through a book or during a casual conversation over lunch, other people have stimulated me, encouraged me, and sharpened me into the teacher I am. Where would I be without all of those people? And if we want to be really broad about it, sitting in my comfortable seat on Southwest Airlines, I thought about how dependent I am on the skill of the pilot, the training of the flight attendants, and on all the people who clean, maintain, and fuel the plane. I wouldn't have been able to get to Las Vegas safely without them. And if we want to take it one step further, what about all of the engineers who designed the plane, the researchers who uncovered the secrets of aerodynamics, and the ancient mathematicians and astronomers on whom all their work is based? Heavens, an entire universe came together to put me on that stage at the Venetian in Las Vegas. If I'm a star, then I'm one sitting in the midst of the vast Milky Way. When we remember the others who made our accomplishments possible, when we recognize just how much we owe them, we can't help but overflow with gratitude, that spontaneous hymn of praise that honors the contribution of others. Gratitude always expands our hearts, unfailingly protects us from arrogance, trains us in humility, and unites us to each other in the greatest constellation of all, the communion of saints, the body of Christ. Knowing for certain that you too will do many things for which you deserve much praise, I'd suggest that the next time you're singled out, take a moment and be proud of yourself. You should take pleasure in your accomplishment. Then, fast as you can, ask yourself, whose work enabled me? Who helped make my achievement possible? Who encouraged me along? Who sacrificed something to make sure I could succeed? If you do nothing else each day, at least tell someone how grateful you are for something he or she has done for you. The thorn bush of acclaim can't penetrate a skin coated in gratitude. Swept up in the communion of saints, grateful to the people who came before us and hopeful for the effect our work will have on the future, we aren't bothered so much anymore by either the din of applause or the silence of its absence. The thorn bushes around us just wither when they can't provoke us to either arrogance or despair. We go to work every day, doing the work God gave us to do to the best of our ability, accepting our wins with detachment and our losses with grace too. We don't need that kind of feedback to measure our worth anyway. We already know we're truly worthwhile people. We are stones in the highway of a king, part of the plan. The soil is good, the sun is bright, and there is joy in each new day. Before we close, I'd like to leave you with a few practical ideas about how to protect yourself as you cooperate with God's grace working to move you further and further away from the thorn bushes and ever closer to the good ground. Well, first, keep the gratitude flowing in your daily life. Every day, I try to remember somebody who made something I accomplished possible and say a sincere thank you. But I took it a little further one day during a long, uneventful plane ride. I decided to write my CV not by listing my history of job titles and accomplishments, but by listing people who were catalysts in that history. And so I remembered Joe Plummer, who gave me my first job at Leo Burnett, Nan Ewart, my first boss who convinced me I was talented in my work, Hartmut Felgen, who plucked me out of market research and made it possible for me to move into agency management, Don Schultz, who pulled me out of the agency world and got me to Northwestern, Steve Burnett, who made it possible for me to come to Kellogg, and Barbara and Mary Beth, who made it possible for me to give you this talk tonight. It was a marvelous way to spend the time between Boston and Chicago. It made me realize because of them and because of hundreds more like them, I have been passed from generous hand to generous hand all 60 years of my life. That overwhelming gratitude makes me want to cry. So I heartily recommend this exercise to you. In fact, if someone in your own history to whom you owe a lot is coming to mind right now, I hope you'll jot that name down, and before you go to bed tonight, why not write, text, or call that person and tell him or her how grateful you are for helping make you the person you are today. God brought you that person after all, and none of us wants to be one of the 9 cured lepers who forgets to say thank you. Second, arm yourself against the adulation that will certainly come as soon as you do something people really like. It seems that there's nothing the world loves more than making stars. Do you remember in Acts 14 when Paul and Barnabas visited Lystra and Derbe? And when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they raised their voice, saying in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have become like men and have come down to us." And they began calling Barnabas Zeus and Paul Hermes because he was the chief speaker. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought oxen and garlands to the gate and wanted to offer sacrifice with the crowds. When the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of this, they tore their garments and rushed out into the crowd. "Friends, why do you do this?" they shouted frantically. "We are only men, human like you. We are bringing you the good news that will convert you from just such follies as these to the living God." Yet even with a speech such as this, they could scarcely stop the crowds from offering sacrifice to them. It was no different then than it is now, and so you can't let adulation get through your defenses and go to your head. Of course, you could hire someone to ride behind you in your chariot, whispering, "Remember you are but a man," in your ear, the way the Roman generals supposedly did during their triumphal parades. But I think the best way to protect ourselves from the temptation to arrogance is to give the credit we get away to other people as soon as possible. When we do that, we slip away, like Christ did when the crowd saw his miracles and wanted to make him the king. Third, cherish every whisper of the good you've done for other people. It will keep you hopeful in the bad times when nothing seems to be going your way. My good friend, Father Joe Henchy, told me a heartwarming story the other day on just this point. Father Joe is 85 and lives in his religious congregation's retirement house in Boston. One day, a middle-aged Monsignor came to lunch, invited by one of Father Joe's confreres. When he was introduced to Father Joe, he exclaimed, "This is wonderful. I've always wanted to meet you. You saved my vocation, you know." Now, as you might expect, Father Joe was puzzled because the man was a perfect stranger. This Monsignor went on to ask him if he remembered a particular Father John from days long gone by. "Why, yes," Father Joe said, "he was one of my students." "Well," the Monsignor replied, "Father John told me that when he was a young, struggling seminarian, you saved him from giving up on the priesthood. He stayed true to his vocation and eventually became a respected seminary professor himself. And when I was a young, struggling seminarian, he saved me from giving up. So even though we've never met, you should know you had a hand in saving my vocation too. Thank you, Father." Quite rightly, Father Joe felt overjoyed all the rest of the day. Something similar happened to me just a few weeks ago, and I felt the same way. I got a message in my inbox out of the blue that read, "Dear Lisa, I was your student a long time ago. It's taken me 21 years to write to you, but I'm not going to let another day go by without telling you what a difference your class made to my whole career." So I put that email from Nisha in a special folder, and I'm going to take it out on days when that thorn bush of disregard starts scraping at me and I start feeling despondent because nobody is paying attention to me. The whisper of the good we've done isn't limited to our work lives. We sometimes hear it in our personal lives too. 12 years ago, my 12-year-old niece came to visit and asked if we could teach her how to eat properly at a table. At her house, you see, mostly they ate on TV trays or in the car. So my husband Alan and I got out all of the china and the crystal and silver and showed her which forks to use, which glasses to drink from, and what the different plates were for. She called me the other day and said, "Aunt Lisa, I had an interview with Ernst & Young today and they took me to lunch at a fancy restaurant and I knew exactly what to do with every plate, fork, and glass." Isn't that wonderful? Whenever we touch another life, we emit something like a sound vibration whose echo will never end. On those precious days when we're blessed to hear that echo come back to us, even if only as a tiny whisper, we should take heart. The plan is in process. Fourth, and given that we are destined to affect eternity in some way or another in every single thing we do, then we must do whatever we do with excellence. St. Paul wrote to the Colossians, "Whatever you do, work at it with your whole being. Do it for the Lord rather than for men, since you know full well you will receive an inheritance from Him as your reward." So, do I do everything every day to the absolute best of my ability? I'm ashamed to say no, not always. Sometimes I lose the plot and slip into laziness, and so I have to keep after myself and beg God to help me. And for a long time, too, I have to admit I was influenced by a motto a cynical colleague of mine was fond of quoting: "Work not worth doing is not worth doing well." Today, I realize nothing could be further from the truth. There is no such thing as work not worth doing well. As Dorothy Sayers, the Christian essayist, wrote in Creed or Chaos, "No crooked table legs or ill-fitting drawers ever, I dare swear, came out of the carpenter's shop at Nazareth. Nor if they did, could anyone believe that they were made by the same hand that made heaven and earth. What the church should be telling the worker is this, that the very first demand that his religion makes upon him is that he should make good tables. The only Christian work is good work well done. Let the church see to it that the workers are Christian people and do their work well. Then all the work will be Christian work, whether it is church embroidery or sewage farming." When we do the work God has given us to do with our whole being and for the Lord, we rise to the ideal of every human life by imitating Christ, who said to his Father, "I have given you glory on earth by finishing the work you gave me to do." Over the course of the last several years, it's astonishing to me how much my view of work is changing. I'm going from craving to be a bright, singular star to being joyful, knowing that I'm an essential piece of something more glorious than I could ever have achieved myself or even imagined. I'm leaving the precarious tightrope I walked while seeking the applause of other people to walking on the wide, smooth path of service, enjoying the view all around me. I'm leaving behind the demons of arrogance and despair, at least most of the time, to live a life of gratitude and hope. And I'm learning to say the last word of the Lord's Prayer every day with gusto. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.